So, you dearest people, this is our third day. I think our third time to meet. We've really talked a lot about the mind, but we will continue to do that, and maybe we'll do something a bit different today. But I think we'll start with our little, just our prayer, aspiration. The first, yeah, here it is. The first two lines of our prayer. For those of us who already identify with being Buddhists, it's just reminding us of our reliance on the Buddha. Here we go. And then the second two lines are just expressing this motivation for our being together. We're going to listen to these teachings, and that includes me, I promise, to see if we can find some tools from it to help us in our daily life, navigate the dramas of life, but in the long term to help us develop our full potential so we can be of benefit to others. This is expressing this idea. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok. Okay, let's go. So as we've been talking, the really the central point that about Buddhism, actually the whole of Buddhism is based in this point, that this mind of ours, this consciousness, this capacity for cognition, which he says is not physical, which is not the product, the handiwork of a creator or mummy or daddy, is not a function of the brain, doesn't start in the womb of our mother, but is going back and back and back and will continue forward, that this mind of ours has this incredible potential. One way they say it is the mind is naturally pure. So this is incredibly encouraging, but we have to understand it. Don't mystify it, make it sound like religion. But this is a shocking point if you think about it. If we're a materialist and you speak to a neuroscientist and you say that mind is naturally pure, it has no meaning. Mind is the brain. What do you mean the brain is pure? It's a load of flesh, So we have to understand what Buddha means by this. Otherwise, I think often I say it, we so easily mystify what is called religious philosophy. Religion is philosophy. Don't think it's not. We want to put religion in some weird little place where it's not very important. It used to be the center of the world in our culture, didn't it? Back in the 1,000 years ago. But it's another view of the world. You've got the communist view, you've got all these viewpoints. You've got Australian Aboriginal view of the world, which is so abstract, I tell you, I don't understand it. And that's been around for about 40,000 years until the white people came along and messed them up. You've got all these different views around the world, all these human beings looking into the meaning of life, which I think is marvelous, which is why for me I would never criticize any of these views. How arrogant. We like to do that. The religions criticize each other. The materialists really believe they're superior and all religious people are silly, It's just very arrogant. This human being is coming up with views of the world. How marvelous. So the Buddha's view is quite specific and quite, he doesn't posit a soul. This is how we've been talking. Normally speaking, if you're a materialist, you have a body and you have a mind, and the mind is the brain. That means you're only the body. If you're a Christian, for example, you have a mind, a brain, a mind, a body, and a soul. Buddha doesn't discuss that. As we've been talking, the word mind for the Buddha covers everything. Covers instinct, intuition, unconscious, subconscious, negative states of mind, positive, emotions, intellect. All of this is known by the word mind. So it's got a much broader application. We can see this, from the Buddhist point of view. But so it's easy enough to just, to study the mind, and they do very extensively in the Tibetan Buddhist monastic university system. But as His Holiness the Dalai Lama said in one of his commentaries, we can say all those things, but to actually have a direct experience of your own mind, because that's the point. That's really quite difficult. It's quite subtle, If it's not physical, how do you get hold of it? This is what's interesting. This is why I think in our culture we don't trust kind of internal subjective experience. even when it comes to philosophy, I mean, like psychology, I think is not a hard science. We like neuroscience. It's the brain. You can get hold of it. You can see it. You can put a microscope onto it. We trust that system. We trust that in our world. It's external. We trust that, but we don't trust the mind. So even it seems to me, I'm not sure. I haven't studied much in the West. I haven't studied much of the Western philosophies and all those. I haven't studied them, but the feeling is, a friend of mine, one of the American Tibetan Buddhist professors, he was one of the first ones to start to be the head of one of the departments in one of the universities, who was actually a practitioner. And he said his other philosophical brothers and sisters in the other departments kind of looked down upon him because he was practicing it. I mean, it seems to me the Socratic approach is that you don't dare involve in a philosophy. You step back, you observe, and you stay objective. And the idea of practicing a philosophy, I mean, not necessarily all the time, but not necessarily all the views, but usually it's seen as something objective. That for me is like thinking that you study musical theory, but you dare not practice it because that's too subjective. I mean, you'd be called mentally ill if you knew musical theory but didn't practice it. If you knew cake theory, every recipe of how to make a cake, but you never dared make a cake because that's too subjective. I mean, what a joke, But that's how we treat thoughts about reality. So the Buddha's view is the kind of the clarity and the precision and the depth of analysis and the rigor and the discipline that we know we need to really be a good neuroscientist, to be a good botanist, to be a good cake maker, for goodness sake. That is exactly what is necessary in order to know the mind. Because whose mind are you knowing? First and foremost, your own. This is what's unique to the Buddhas. And not unique to the Buddha. It came from these Indians before the Buddha. They're the ones, as I often say, that as His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, they were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. And where did they look? Not with a microscope on a brain, but with the inner microscope, their own mind, observing the mind itself. We don't have that in our culture. We don't trust that, and we don't have anything like that. Not with precision, but this is the point, and it's really fascinating. So if we really want to be a serious Buddhist, that's our choice, of course, we need to study it intimately. How can you really grow a magnificent garden if you don't study botany? You can't just follow your feelings. You have to know exactly botany theory. Of course you do. Well, it's exactly the same here, to really go to the level that we can. So then this mind, it's pure. So we have to know what that means. It's very simple. It's not complicated. And let's look at that and see if we can discuss this. How we can see logically why, from the Buddhist perspective, delusions, neuroses, unhappy states of mind, all these unhappy misconceptions, these delusions, these afflictions, why they are not intrinsic within us, why they are not integral, why they are not at the core of our being. This is the point that underpins every single thought and theory in the entirety of Buddhism. Like I've said a couple of times, I'm sure, this is all indicated by the word Buddha itself. The etymology of the word Buddha. Bud and da. Bud and the Tibetan equivalent, Sangye. The first syllable implies the utter, total, complete, irreversible eradication from one's mind of all the neuroses, the things we are so intimately familiar with. Anger, depression, anxiety, jealousy, low self-esteem, you name it. All the way, of course, to the Buddhist, to the idea of ego grasping. And I think we might talk about this today and talk about emptiness. Everything leads to this one. The ultimate nature of our mind. All of that from the Buddha he has found, not just from speculation, not from revelation. He didn't make it up. He didn't have a dream of it. He didn't have a vision of it. He's not speculating. It's his own direct experience. That is something that is so crucial to take on board. I can't stress that enough. We are so used to thinking of religion as revelation, as something created by somebody, as something made up, Think about this. This is really incredible. If you even were simply a cook, a simple cake maker, a baker, and you decided, to write a book. I mean, the people who write recipe books, they try one recipe 30 times before they dare to put it in the book. because they need to be accurate. They need to be convinced that it is accurate, because you're giving advice. A recipe is advice. And this is really, and that's just to make a cake. But look at how we think about spiritual. Someone goes to a weekend course, they have some kind of vision, they write a book about it. We think, oh, I'm allowed to believe what I like. That's how we insult. That's how we don't treat religion seriously, religious philosophy. It's something you believe in. And that's reasonable if you like, if you have the creator religions, because necessarily it is impossible to prove that God is right. If you can prove that God is right, then you are equal to God. And that you cannot say if you have that view, that creator religious view. But that's not the Buddha's view. I'm sure I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's a really powerful point for me. And it's the only time this question has ever been asked. In all the years I've been around as a Buddhist, this is the only time I've heard this particular question. We all ask the same questions, but this question, one man asked it. It was in Nelson in New Zealand. I'll never forget. He was a scientist, in fact. And he said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? That's a perfect question if you have a religious view that posits a creator. It's revelation, isn't it? How else can you get that information? They all laughed. He laughed and we laughed when I said, would you ask Einstein who revealed the teachings about relativity to him? Of course people laugh, because we know perfectly well that Einstein did not make it up. It was not revelation. He didn't have a dream. He didn't have a vision. He's not speculating. He experienced this directly with his own mind, and then he presents his findings. We know he's not asking us to believe him. We know he's not speculating. So he presents it and he says, these are my findings. This is what I have found to be true. Now, if you'd like to prove it as well, over to you, I can't describe it. That is precisely the Buddhist approach. But it really, even as Buddhists, it takes us time to hear this, because we're so convinced you can't prove it, it's not possible, blah, 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 The Buddha's point is, when you study Buddhist philosophy, you learn there are several synonyms for that which exists. Object of knowledge, established base, existent. There are several. And the definition of an existent, something that exists. The definition is that which can be cognized by mind. So it's axiomatic in Buddhism that which can be cognized by mind, a valid cognition, is that which exists. That's pretty intense. That's pretty powerful. That shows how mind is not just some peripheral thing. In Buddhism, it's the creator of the universe, because it all comes down to viewpoints. It's very, very different view, and it's very fascinating, Okay. So let's look at, I think we'll talk about emptiness. How many more classes have we got, Anne?
Just one in this series.
Coming after this?
Yes.
Okay, good. Fantastic. Good. Okay. So, like I said, there's two things I want to do. One thing is to try and show logically how the neurotic states of mind, which is implied by the word, the eradication of which is implied by the syllable Bud, and by the way, again reminding, da or gye, sangye, Buddha, da implies the development to perfection of all the virtues, all the goodness, all the wisdom. So what's implied by this, of course, this is the mind being pure in its nature, that virtues and wisdom and clarity and goodness and kindness and love and compassion, they are at the core of our being. They are the very nature of who we are. I like to use the analogy of water. We know that water is H2O, speaking simply. Two bits of H, one bit of O. Think about it. But if water's polluted, there's pollution in that water, and indeed if you drank it you would die, there's no question. But listen to this point, that pollution does not fundamentally destroy the nature of the water, does it? It pollutes it, and you can once you've identified precisely the pollution, you can extract it, and what are you left with? The natural purity of the water. It's a good analogy. So mind, what is the H2O of mind is wisdom and clarity and goodness and virtue and compassion and kindness. This is not just some religious idea. This is the logic in Buddhism. It's very fascinating. So we should try and find what is the logic that virtues are at the core of our being and that delusions and neuroses are not. This is the thing. I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about the ultimate pure nature, which is the emptiness of the mind. The ultimate. We've got the relative and the ultimate. So that the clarity of the mind. Lama Yeshe talks about this in his wonderful book Mahamudra, and I might just read you from Lama's book. It's very beautiful. Lama Yeshe. His book, it came out last year from Wisdom Publications. I really recommend you read it. Lama Yeshe had this amazing skill. He was my first teacher, he and Lama Zopa. And they met their first Western or non-Tibetan students, their Western students. It was in the mid-60s, after the Tibetans came into exile. They met their first Western student, an American woman in Darjeeling, and then from there they went to Kathmandu, and then in 1970, I think around then, they moved to this place that's now known as Kopan Monastery. Some of you must have been there. It's now a flourishing monastery for 500 monks, and down the road 500 nuns or 400, and then foreigners come every month. These days, of course, the last year there's been nobody coming, but they've been running courses all year for now, since the 1970s. An amazing special place. So what was I saying? It was such a long sentence, I forget. Where was I? Yeah, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa. Lama Yeshe's skill. Lama Yeshe had this incredible, if you listen Buddhism in Tibet was there since about the 7th century, and it stayed very rich and intact up until 1959, because the Mount Everest is in between. You've got to climb over the mountains to get to Tibet, and they were not very welcoming to foreigners. So all those years, the good side of that is that their incredible monastic university system stayed intact, and even in the 1959, more than 1/6 of the population were living in the monasteries, were studying. And it was like medieval Europe, the religion and philosophy were equal. They were the same. They came from the same source, So the interesting thing is, when they first went to Tibet, the Indians, Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, they, gradually the Indians came to Tibet and Buddhism became stable there. They created the language. Based on Sanskrit, they created the language in Tibetan unique to the philosophy. They created a philosophical religious language, they had an honorific language, and they've got a regular day-to-day language. So that religious philosophical language is exactly what they use right now in the 21st century, invented in the 8th century. So this is the thing, when you hear the traditional Tibetan Lama teach, it's literally medieval, pre-medieval, because that's the language they used that was constructed back then. So in a way, that's marvelous. But it's kind of arcane, it's hard to get. So I know when I first heard the teachings from Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe in the mid-70s when I met the Lamas, I remember I didn't understand the concepts. I understand the words, but I didn't understand the way the presentation that Lama Zopa was giving. It was arcane, very ancient. But Lama Yeshe, when he came along, his English was crazy. He had this chaotic English, but both of them learned English. They were so kind, But he had this incredible ability to communicate with modern people. He just somehow understood. I edit his books, and it just is so moving to me to hear the way that Lama finds the words to express the meaning of this arcane language to us, It was extraordinary. And this is Mahamudra book. He gave this teaching in Australia, 1982 or something. I can't remember the year. But it's it's extraordinary. His ability to communicate was just amazing, So Mahamudra, we'll discuss that later. Let's first look at how we can prove logically that neuroses, ego grasping, delusions, are not intrinsic, are not at the core of our being. This point is at the basis of all the Buddhist philosophy, all the Buddhist metaphysics, all the Buddhist meditation, all the Buddhist theories and practice. This is the goal, Buddha. So let's try and see if we can prove this logically. So again, remember, the word mind doesn't just refer to the intellect, up here, rational, clear thinking. That is one aspect of mind, all the intellectual thoughts. But then we've got another part, we point down here, don't we, the emotions, the feelings. And these we are very caught up with, aren't they? And we see this as completely separate. Up here, musical theory, cake theory, all the nice concepts up here, mathematical theories, rational thoughts. That's here, and then emotions are here. But what's fascinating about Buddhist psychology, and this is the point I'm getting to, is that all of the level of mind that we function at in day-to-day life, including brilliant intellectual thoughts, including emotions, positive emotions, negative emotions, they are all conceptuality, concepts, thoughts. Now, this makes sense up here. When we think of a recipe, that's thoughts. 4 eggs, 2 this, 3 that. That's thoughts. Very clear. But when it comes to anger, for example, to say that's a bunch of thoughts, what are you talking about? Let's prove that it is, okay? Because when we can get this point, we understand the Buddhist approach to working on the mind. So these, there's various terms in Buddhist psychology. The key one for the unhappy states of mind, I'll call them those, the neuroses, these are just words that I'm using. The word is affliction. I don't know in your language or Romanian if you use that word. Is it a common word, is it, Anne, in Romanian? Affliction?
No, it's not a common word.
So when you translate it, how do you, what kind of word do you use to translate it?
It's amăgiri. I mean, something like delusion, not delusion, like something that make you believe that something is there but is not.
Oh, okay, that's delusion. That's correct. But the word affliction, that's the typical word they use from the Sanskrit klesha. How do you translate that? Because delusion is one aspect of an affliction, but it's not the meaning of affliction.
I found it translated as delusions, amăgiri, but I don't think it's the correct one, but I don't know how to translate it.
No, I understand.
Romanian.
Okay, well, let's look at this. So the term in Sanskrit that's very typically used when we refer to anger and jealousy and resentment and low self-esteem and attachment, these emotions, these unhappy emotions, the word that's typically used in Sanskrit is klesha, and it's translated, and the English word is a quite accurate word, it's affliction. Well, if you look it up, it just means a problem. It's a problem. You're afflicted with sickness. You're afflicted with difficulties. An affliction. But the fact is, in English, and certainly obviously in Romanian, it's not a modern word. You don't use it, it's a very old-fashioned word. In some other languages, I've found that it is a common word. So the trouble is, when we say, "Oh, I've got an affliction," it's a very typical Buddhist term. We sort of put it over there as something separate. But I mean, for example, Lama Yeshe was amazing. When I edited Mahamudra, I identified at least 20 different terms that Lama used to try and, instead of the word affliction, he never used the word affliction. He somehow knew it wasn't used in English. I never used the word affliction. So it simply means a problem. So, but you can have different kinds of afflictions. You can have a headache. Oh, that's an affliction. It's a problem. An affliction it usually means a personal thing, an affliction, but then you've got mental afflictions, haven't you? Geshe Sopa, one of the lamas who was invited first to the United States by His Holiness in 1960, and he remained there in Wisconsin, and he was a professor at the university there. He passed away now. And one of the classical commentaries on the Lam Rim, which is published by Wisdom Publications in 5 volumes, is the commentary that Geshe Sopa gave in English very slowly over 25 years. If you want a classic text for the Lam Rim in your studies, Anne, of course you know these books, this is the perfect one. So he would always at least say the term mental affliction. That's getting closer to the truth. But just to say I've got an affliction, and we use that if we're Buddhists, it's just sort of meaningless. So what is it? Let's just look at another term for it. Well, an illness is an affliction. She's afflicted with illness, is how you'd say it. It's an affliction. But what kind of affliction is Buddha talking about here? He's talking indeed about mental afflictions. So another word for an affliction, you could say, would be here a mental illness. Now, I don't know from Romanian, but in English and other languages, to say that you've got a mental illness is a very powerful statement. You'd be very shocked and very outraged, and you'd keep it a secret. You don't want to be told you've got a mental illness, because that's serious, isn't it? Think about this. But this, and I'm not joking now, but this is precisely, I can't tell you how precise that term is. That for me would be the perfect term for the word affliction when it comes to attachment, anger, jealousy. Now, the trouble is for us, our view of a mental illness is a more dramatic thing. When you've got to be locked in, you've got to be sent off to the insane asylum, or go to the doctors and get pills, or, have serious treatment. That's when you've got a mental illness. So our view of mental illness in our culture is more radical. But the Buddha is being more subtle, that's all. He's being more radical. He is saying the extent to which you have any ego grasping, attachment, anger, jealousy, low self-esteem. I mean, ordinary, simple words that everybody knows we've got, but which in our culture we think is just normal. And you'd never go to your therapist if you go to your therapist. You don't say, "Oh, I felt guilty today." She'll tell you to shut up and go home and wait till you have a serious problem. But that's the point. Our view in the world, in modern psychology, factors in ordinary attachment, anger, jealousy as normal human states. Normal meaning that you would be not normal if you didn't have them. So we've got to really look at these assumptions. Whereas the Buddha is saying, to the degree that we have any attachment, anger, guilt, jealousy, depression, low self-esteem, to that degree we are mentally ill. But try not to hear it in a rigid way. It's just I'm trying to reuse that term. Now we need, so there's two things here that I'm trying to get to. So, like I've mentioned before, this is the crucial point in Buddhist psychology. When we're looking into the mental consciousness, which is how we function day to day, from the time we open our eyes until the time we go to sleep, we've got the sensory consciousness, forget that one, and then we have the mental consciousness. Then, like I'm saying, we've got all the intellect, the thoughts, the concepts, the clever thoughts, scientific thoughts, blah, blah, blah. Then we have the emotions. So these are where there's the three categories here. There are the neurotic, unhappy, mental illnesses, afflictions, delusions, this word that Anne's using that is a crucial word, that one that we're going to get to. This is the essential one to understand. Disturbing emotions. There are many terms we can use. Neuroses is a loose term in English we could use. Well, it's Greek actually, isn't it? Then you've got the positive thoughts, love and compassion and kindness. They are not afflictions. They are not delusions. They are not disturbing emotions. They are valid. They are reasonable. They are, you check, do your proof right here, right now. This first term is disturbing emotion. This is evident. Check the last time you were anxious. You were disturbed. It's very simple. It's a disturbing emotion. It's a mental illness. Don't be shocked. Check the last time you were feeling very loving towards somebody, very compassionate. Check, you felt wonderful. So this is sort of the first point to really see from our own direct experience that when we're caught up in anger and depression, we are naturally, we're tight, we feel separate from everybody, we're gripped with misery. It's so evident, but we don't kind of spell it out like this. Then you check love, compassion, kindness. We know very well you feel good. And if you're on the receiving end of love and kindness, you feel good. If you are on the receiving end of anger and depression, you do not feel good. So these points are so obvious, are so evident, are so natural, but we don't spell it out like this in modern psychology. But this is the essence in Buddhism. So these disturbing emotions, anger, all these, the only time we notice them, this is the point now, one of the points, the only time we notice these disturbing emotions, which are functions of the mind, is when the body is involved. Now, our body and our mind are intimately connected. The Tibetan Buddhist medical system, which is based on the Vajrayana system of explaining the physical and the mental, which is very fascinating, which is sort of similar to the Ayurvedic system in India, the acupuncture system in China. It's very ancient, And so this explains how we have an intimate relationship between our body and our mind. There's a very different explanation of these things. So because in our culture, and because in general, we are very caught up in our body. This is me. This is all we think about. Whether we're happy or suffering is pretty much rooted in what our body feels, We're so addicted to our body. We make the body the boss. as Lama Yeshe says. So, of course, that's reinforced in our modern culture because we only have the body. We don't posit anything else. If you're a Christian, you'll posit a soul. But you're a materialist, philosophical materialist. You only have a body. So this is who I am, this big fat bag of bones, No, not for the Buddha. The body has, we have particular function of cognition through the senses. So eye consciousness, we've discussed this. Eye consciousness is that part of your mind, which is not physical, that functions through the medium of the eyeball. Ear consciousness, taste consciousness. Mind is not physical, but those levels of consciousness are very gross. They're very limited in their capacity for cognition, and they function directly through the body, the eyeball, the eardrum, the nerves, the blah, blah, blah. So sensory consciousness is very limited. We discussed this. But then you've got your mental consciousness, your thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, the entire spectrum of our inner being, as we've been talking. And as Lama Zopa puts it, that's where the workshop is. This is what we need to learn to unpack and unravel to the most sophisticated degree, which is why we need to cultivate single-pointed concentration. So if we've got time today, but if not today, next week we're going to go into, using Lama Yeshe's Mahamudra book, look into concentration, the qualities you'd cultivate if you had it, that you would have if you had it, and how it's necessary in the long term to unpack and unravel the mind and eventually achieve the pure nature of your being by becoming a Buddha, So anyway, here we're talking about the mental consciousness, not the physical. That's the big point. So my point is this. When it comes to the emotions, and we point here, the especially both positive and negative, we only notice them. This is the point. We only notice these feelings, these emotions, when the body is involved. Think about it. A person who gets angry easily, and that's my style, I'm trying to behave nicely now in my old age, but you understand, it was a very typical habit for me as a little girl. It was very clear. I did not know I was angry until my body was shaking. And of course, my anger didn't take long to come out the mouth. I didn't suppress it. So the second my body was shaking and the words were coming out my mouth, it was evident Robina was angry. Now, what about if you're one of the kind of people who's quite peaceful and you don't get angry, you don't shout, you've got nice behavior? This is incredible. But look for you. How does your aversion, which is the fundamental bone, the bare bones level of anger, which is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants, we've discussed this and I'm going to say it again, when you have your aversion builds up every day, but you don't notice it until one day you cannot get out of bed because you are completely full of depression. That's when you notice what's going on in your mind. But look how much longer it takes for you, because it doesn't express itself easily. Because why? In both of these cases, what's the problem? Is because we only notice what's going on in our emotional mind when the body feels something. And that's way too late. This is the simple fundamental point, that if we could get this, we'd be completely transformed, I tell you. In other words, it's that analogy I might have used. It's a rather silly one, but it's a good analogy. It's like, you've got this beautiful car, but you've never heard of the concept of mechanics. You've never thought of a mechanic. You didn't know there was such a thing. So you just drive your car and you drive your car and you drive your car. You never get the oil checked. You never get the wheels checked. You just drive it. And then one day at 180 kilometers an hour on the freeway, if you're allowed to do what the Germans do, I don't know. Let's say you do. If 180 kilometers an hour on the freeway, and suddenly you notice that your wheels are falling off. That's too late, isn't it? Oh, what'll I do? It's a bit late. And this is exactly our problem in the West, in the modern world. We wait until the wheels fall off. We wait until you can't get out of bed one morning before you go to the therapist, before you think you've got a problem. We wait till you want to kill yourself or your husband before you realize you've got a problem. But the Buddha's point is all these emotions at the level where the body is involved, where we notice it, they are rooted at a much subtler level. They are all rooted in being conceptual stories. Buddha is a brilliant cognitive therapist, and I am not joking. The whole of Buddha's practice is based upon unpacking and unraveling starting at the physical, at the emotional level, but going more deeply, which is why we need a daily practice, to begin to listen to these thousands of thoughts that are happening from the second we wake up until the second we go to sleep, and even in our dreams. The mind never stops, does it? These endless conceptual stories. So this is the point is, like the car analogy, we don't notice those thousands of thoughts and what they're all saying until they are screaming, until the wheels are falling off. Then we think, I better do something about it, but it's just too late. This is the skill we can get from Buddhism, you know. I mean, Buddha's really are brilliant at this, that we've got these skills that enable us to stabilize the mind even a little bit. And why? Not to make all the thoughts go away. That's one of the biggest misconceptions. When you've got single-pointed concentration, you'll be in effortless control and your thoughts will never get out of control. But that's the long term. At the beginning, the benefit of single-pointed concentration, a simple practice of 5 minutes every day, where you learn to focus, let's say, on the breath, and you allow the thoughts to come and go. Often we think we're getting worse, but we're not getting worse. We're just hearing them for the first time because we're giving ourselves a break. We're stepping out of our head, watching the breath for 5 minutes, so you can't help but hear all the crazy thoughts. This is actually good because now you're beginning to see what's going on. You're hearing the wheels wobbling. You're noticing the wobbling wheels before they get out of control. This is the skill. And so we have to have this courage to want to go deep into our mind, to want to go beyond the physical, beyond the intense emotional, to hear the thoughts that are informing the emotion, that are informing. So anger, I'm sure I've said this before, but you listen to this, it's very logical. Let's say one of you doesn't shout and yell, you're kind of peaceful nature, but you know your mind is crazy, you never stop, and your fear and worries and drama, you can hear your thoughts never stopping, but you behave nicely. This is wonderful. Now, a person like me, who has bad behavior, as I said, I'm trying to be a good girl now I'm old, you know, as well, my thoughts are always out of control as well. So your thoughts are out of control, but you behave nicely. My thoughts are out of control and I behave badly. Well, you're one step ahead of me, you know, because at least you don't harm other people. But both of us, the same problem. Our thoughts are berserk. So now let's say you're having angry thoughts about your husband, but you're behaving nicely. And you very kindly wrote them all down on a piece of paper. And then if you translate, you know, if you transcribe my angry fit, shouting and yelling about my husband. Listen to this point. You hear me shouting and yelling, oh, wow, Robina's angry, you know. But you look at Mary, who's not shouting and yelling, oh, Mary's not angry. But if Mary writes down her angry thoughts and then you transcribe my angry shouting, listen to this point, you could even see by reading the words on those two pieces of paper that the quiet person, that Mary's thoughts are more violent than mine. That's a possibility. So that's what anger is. Anger, when it's expressed through the body, is when it harms others. This is terrible. But anger is rooted in this exaggerated, distorted, extreme, deluded, disturbing, conceptual story. How dare he do that to me? He is evil. I want to kill him. He is the cause of all my suffering. I will never forgive him. This is unbearable. How dare he do this to me? They are angry thoughts. You don't need to hear a person shouting to read those words and know that's called anger. So all the emotions are rooted in being conceptual stories. It is so clearly evident if you think about it and point it out. The shouting is just the physical expression of it, you know. But we don't pay attention to our mind. We don't even think it plays any role in our lives, as Lama Zopa says. This is very shocking. So this is Buddha's analysis. As therapists and as going to therapy, we are looking into the mind. But Buddha's view is so precise, I can't tell you. Our culture, of course, our different types of psychology and different types of psychotherapy, many, many variations, marvelous, helping people's minds. Because we are all, the materialist view is rooted in the view that you are the product of the parents. You are the product of the genes, the chemicals, the DNA, the physical. So, and we are the product of external circumstances. So when I come to you as my therapist and tell you my problems with my husband, in order to analyze my problems, of course, you want to go back into the past, because that's the analysis we all use. I am the product of my past. We look into my past. Now, this is the point. We look back into what mummy did and what daddy did and my genes. We look into what the Catholic nuns did, what the boyfriends and when I was a little girl, what happened, when the dog that bit me, all these things. We look into the external events in order to understand why I get angry, why I'm depressed. Now, that's not wrong, because external circumstances, of course, play a huge role in producing the person I become. But that's not the main point for the Buddha. And I think we can prove it. The point for the Buddha is, okay, let's say I'm angry and Anne is my therapist. Tell me about your anger, Robina. So first of all, I will give her a detailed description. I will tell her all about how my father did this and my mother did that, and how I'm scared and I built up this anger, and then my boyfriend did this and my boyfriend did that. We will unpack the external events. I ask, and so why am I suffering? Why am I angry? Because mummy did this, because daddy did this, because I developed this habit, because I did that. That's how we talk. We all believe this as utterly as the truth, that the external circumstances are the main cause of who I am, including my good qualities, Now, you ask Buddha, Buddha, why am I angry? His answer is very simple, so simple we can't hear it. He says, fine, look into what your mother did and father did. That's okay, but let's look at the anger itself. So why you're angry, Robina, guess what? Is because you have got a tendency to be angry in your mind. Yeah, I know that, Buddha. I know that. Tell me why I'm angry. Because you've got even a more simple answer. Why am I angry today? Well, Robina, I'm sorry, because you were angry yesterday. It's a habit. Yeah, all right then, but why was I angry yesterday? Hearing my question, we're looking for something out there. He says, no, look at the mind itself. Anger is the product of previous anger. And yesterday's anger is the product of the day before's anger. And that anger is the product of the day before's anger. And that anger is the product of the day before's anger. And you will keep going and you will never ever get, we're not discussing the outside. The outside does play a role, but the outside world for the Buddha is merely a catalyst, a secondary cause. The main cause of what's in the mind is what's in the mind before. In other words, it's a simple one. I can see you playing the piano really well. It's evident you've got lots of knowledge about piano in your mind. And I'll say, I don't know that. And I'll say, wow, why are you good at piano? And you'll answer, well, Robina, it's pretty obvious. Because I've been practicing piano yesterday. And I was good at piano yesterday because I practiced the day before. And you get right back to the point where you started to play piano at the age of 3. What even caused you to even think about piano was the imprint, the tendency in your mind from, and indeed past lives. You came into this life with a tendency to play piano. It's exactly the same as anger, jealousy, love, intelligence, kindness, whatever you want to point to in the mind. The main source of what is in my mind today is what in my mind before. So that's where Buddha looks. Buddha looks in the past, but whose past? My past, not mummies and daddies. This takes a while to get used to, but it's not complicated. We're not used to thinking it because we're so addicted to believing instinctively. It's ego's function to believe instinctively that the cause is out there for the happiness as well. Why are you happy? Oh, the chocolate cake was divine. We blame the chocolate cake for our happiness. Why are you angry? The husband was mean. We blame the husband for the anger. So this is the dualistic view of ego that puts it all out there. But the Buddha's expertise is the mind itself. So to even get to the point where we want to observe what's in our mind, we want to hear the anger and know it's mine. First of all, recognizing it through the body, and then as we get more progress, we begin to listen to the conceptual stories. We unpack and unravel the actual concept, the story, the script that anger is saying. And then we have to unpack and unravel that. It's a misconception. This is the part that's hard to really understand, Are we communicating, people? Ask me some questions based on what I've said so far, if you'd like to. No questions? It's okay if there aren't. It's really okay. Okay, let me continue then.
I have a question.
Oh, good. Yes, yes.
I was thinking, why do we, from a Buddhist perspective, of course, why do we need so much, we like so much to talk about moments when we were angry or when we were sad, and to talk more and more and more and more about that with everybody if it's possible.
So you mean, okay, we need, we need to be our own therapists. Okay, that's Lama Yeshe's lovely way of putting it. We need to be our own therapists. We need to want to understand our own anger. So when we talk about it with each other, we're just sort of sharing because we feel the pain and we can't contain our own feelings. I think that's what it is. That's why we need good therapists. I mean, as a starting point, we didn't learn techniques since a little girl to how to unpack and unravel the conceptual stories inside us. That's quite sophisticated. So we don't know how to do that. And then because this sadness is so strong and the jealousy is so strong and the anger is so strong, we instinctively believe it is, we instinctively believe that it's at the core of our being and therefore it's concrete, and so it scares us. We're terrified, so we can't hold the emotion ourselves, so we have to pour it out to each other. We can't contain, but we don't have a solution. The talking is sort of like it's like you're looking at a garden that's completely out of control, but you don't know botany. So what can you do is just you panic. Oh my God, look at those weeds, it's so terrible. Oh my God, look at those weeds. We don't know how to fix them because we don't know botany. So we just go on and on and on, and it's useless talk. It just increases the misery. Or then we blame other people. We need to learn Buddha's botany in this case, where we can analyze what is going on, know that it is not at the core of my being, and that we can unpack and unravel it, and even because it is concepts, we can begin to train our minds to reconfigure those concepts. That's what cognitive therapy is. You change your thoughts. Slowly you program yourself in new thoughts. Literally, that is the approach. Do you understand? It's like we don't know botany, so what are you going to do? Shout and yell about the weeds. You don't know what else to do. We don't have a solution. Just go on about them. That's our problem in the West until we want to kill somebody or ourselves. That's the tragedy,